What's up, football heads? Welcome back to that show. As always, I am your host, Kyle McQueen, and we are back on another glorious 4 in a row for me, Victory Monday. Hopefully, your team won. Not everyone's team won. Half of y'all's team lost, so it is what it is, but you'll get them next week. There's always next week. And if there's not next week, there's next year. But for us, 9-2, you got to love it. We're going to go here in part one. We're going to go through the 1 o'clock slate. I already talked about the Thursday game on last Friday's show. And I'm going to start with everybody's favorite, the Kansas City Chiefs. Yet again, a tight game comes down to the wire. Too much time left. Patrick Mahomes does what he does. It feels like every time Mahomes scrambles, like really scrambles and like runs and is trying to like get a bunch of yards running the ball, like everyone gets so tight and they don't want to get flagged because it's the golden boy, and if you blast him, you're gonna get flagged, and they let him kind of just like slip through. Like maybe he has this little bit of elusiveness or slipperiness that you wouldn't expect. Like obviously he's not Lamar Jackson, but I don't know, it just feels like every time he rips off a run like he did on that last drive, guys get a little like gun shy with how they want to approach trying to tackle him or hit him. But 30-27 in regulation to the Carolina Panthers, who were coming off a bye, coming off a 2-game win streak. And I mean, yes, it was in Carolina, but I mean, you got to give him props. Like Bryce Young, 21 for 35, 263, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. He had a fumble, did not lose it. Clean game, nothing overly spectacular, but like even the 263 yards I feel like is a big improvement over where he had been last year, this year prior to the win streak. I don't feel like they probably didn't run the ball enough. 35 pass attempts to 16 carries for Chuba Hubbard, 2 for Jonathan Brooks, and 3 for Bryce Young. I imagine were scrambles, maybe designed runs. I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, at the end of the day, they tied the game up late. But again, we talked about this weeks ago. If you want to beat the Chiefs or teams like if you want to beat Detroit now, Detroit has elevated themselves into that stratosphere where you want to beat them, you got to play 4D chess. And I mean, if you're the Panthers, you kind of got to take what you can and come out of this thing like, hey, we just played the 2-time defending Super Bowl champions, team tied for the best record in the league. Generational quarterback, like an actual generational quarterback. And we played him down to the wire. So I think it's positive momentum for the Panthers, who couldn't realistically have expected much more than this, hoped for much more than this. And they almost got it done. But again, if you want to beat the Chiefs, you got to have the ball in your hands with 10 seconds or less on the clock, with the lead or about to take the lead. That's the only way you're going to beat them. There's too much time left on the clock. It is what it is. Chiefs pull out another one. I know Mahomes said after the game that he wants blowouts. He's tired of these tight games. But I mean, it's a cliche for a reason. It's tough to win in the NFL. The guys on the other side are getting paid too. They got a great group of guys. But at the end of the day, a win is a win is a win. Chiefs get the win. And it is interesting, and I'll get into this later when I talk about the Vikings game specifically because of Vikings fans, of which I am one. But certain teams, certain franchises, they get real tight when you have games like this, where like the Chiefs, they've won 3 Super Bowls in recent memory. So like, I mean, you tell me, Chiefs fans, I don't feel like you're sweating these the way some other franchises are, where it's like, we should have just slammed the door shut on these guys. We should have blown these guys out. We got deficiencies as a team. We're not going to be able to get it done in the playoffs if we play games like this and they all come down to the wire, especially, we're playing bad teams and it's coming down to the wire. But I feel like the Chiefs and their fans, they don't really sweat this. Like they understand that it's hard to win games. Like these are the elite of the elite players. Every player in the NFL is elite relative to the full scope of football players across the world. And it's tough. Like what Detroit's doing where they're just beating the dog shit out of people. And granted, they only won 24-6, and we'll get into that game. But the fact that you look at a Detroit score and say, "Oh, they only won 24-6. Oh, they must have had an off day at the office." But like that shit doesn't happen often. Like the '98 Vikings were blowing teams out, the '99 Rams, the '07 Patriots. But like, how often do you see a team that's just murdering teams week after week after week? Like even the best teams in the league year after year. Like even the Bills, you look at the Bills in the Josh Allen era, like they're known for beating the crap out of people, but not every week. Some weeks they do it, and some weeks they don't. Sometimes they blow out pretty good teams. Sometimes they blow out bad teams. Sometimes they play a tight game against a bad team. Sometimes play a tight game against the good teams. But it is what it is. I think you're the Chiefs. You get a win. Like obviously, you would like to not have to sweat these out week after week. But there's no questions you can really have for the Chiefs on like a deep level. Like the Chiefs are capable of winning the Super Bowl. We know this. All the questions you have are little nitpicky things that, is this sustainable? Are you going to be able to do this in the playoffs? And like, because they have Patrick Mahomes, because they have Andy Reid, because the defense, I mean, they gave up 27 points here, 11 in the fourth quarter. But, I feel like you got to look at that and say like, yeah, they could do this in the playoffs. It's not ideal, but they could do it. It's not like my Vikings 2022 Kirk Cousins record for fourth quarter comebacks, 11 one-score games, or 11 one-score victories, I should say. And, the national media Muppets, they're frauds. It's not sustainable. It is what it is. And then come playoff time, they lose to the Giants. But I don't know that it wasn't sustainable because they were playing close games. I think they were playing close games, and it wasn't sustainable because of how bad Ed Donatel's defense was. But like the Chiefs got a great defense. We know what Spags can do calling the plays for the defense. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. They got they got DeAndre Hopkins. They got Xavier Worthy. They got Kelsey. They got Juju Smith-Schuster. So I think if you're a Chiefs fan, you still like you want to see some blowouts. You want to maybe have some games where, because again, the Bills, they got the head-to-head victory and they're only a game back. So like you're still jockeying for that position, even being at 10-1. But I feel like Chiefs fans, they want to see more blowouts. Mahomes wants to see more blowouts, but I don't think you're questioning too hard what they can do. But from the Panthers' point of view, Bryce Young turning a corner. I don't want to say he's turned a corner, but their last three games, 2-1, and the only loss against the Chiefs, who are tied for the best record in the league, two-time defending champion. So I think you got to be at least a little bit cautiously optimistic. Again, the Chiefs' defense has been playing really well. So, a new coaching staff, a new offensive system, a second-year quarterback who had a terrible rookie year. I think you still got to come away, like I said, feeling pretty decent about this. And they play in one of the weakest divisions in football, so they're going to have some winnable games left on the schedule. I think that the Panthers have a chance to, finish the season strong relative to who the Panthers were coming into this season. So I think there's reason for, at the very least, cautious optimism from the Carolina Panthers. Now, the opposite of cautious optimism, I think you got to have cautious pessimism if you're a Texans fan. They suffer a tough loss to the now 3-8 Tennessee Titans. Rough stretch at the end of the game. You miss a chip shot field goal, and then you get the safety. You lose by 5, and you drop to 7-5. I had talked about this after the loss to the Lions. We went through the Texans schedule, and it was like, okay, like they got a stretch here, winnable games, and then they got some tough games coming up after that. But you got a chance to build some momentum, win 3 straight. I believe get to 9-4, and then their next game was a tough but winnable game. That there was a real shot they could get to 10-4 before they got their couple real tough games toward the end of the year. But then you drop this game at home to the Titans, who have been playing not good football. Will Levis has been playing pretty solid ball. He had a clean game a couple weeks ago. He had a fairly clean game last week against the Vikings. He threw an interception late that was, they're down 2 scores, trying to make something happen and just trying to get something going down the field and throw a pick. But, Will Levis has been playing pretty solid ball. Went 18 for 24, 278, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Did lose a fumble, so not really a clean game for him. 2 turnovers, and they still pull out the win. Scored 32 points. Tony Pollard 24 carries. Will Levis had 8 carries for only 10 yards. Julius Chestnut had a carry. So you got 25 carries for your backs. 25 passes, technically 24 for Levis, and then Tyler Boyd had an incompletion. So perfectly balanced there. And what have I been saying for weeks? Run the ball. Run the fucking ball. Titans ran the ball, perfectly balanced, 50-50. Taking out the Levis scrambles. If we put the Levis scrambles in there, then they ran the ball more than they passed. And you could flip that and say, well, those are scrambles where technically they were called pass plays. But as it stands, good balance there. You come out with the win. For the Texans, 14 carries for Joe Mixon. And he was having a rough day. 14 carries, 22 yards for 1.57 average. CJ Stroud had 3 scrambles for 18 yards, and then he threw 33 times. So 33 pass attempts to 14 called runs. And again, having a rough day. We know about the war daddies up front for Tennessee. You know how I feel about my boy Tavondre Sweat, Jeffrey Simmons. And they did a great job against the Vikings the week before. So, this is not a team you can run the ball against with great effectiveness, but you got to keep them honest to some extent. And again, it's not like you're getting blown out and you got to pass to come from behind. It was a tight game the whole way through. But if you're the Texans at home, you're 7-4 coming into this game. You played the Lions real close a couple weeks ago, almost pulled it out. That would have been a massive signature win. But despite, you're still 7-5, you're still in control of the division. You're still probably going to win the division. But if you're thinking about, what coming into the season, a lot of people were picking them to, make it to the conference championship game. A lot of people picking them to go to the Super Bowl. They get Diggs in. We know what Stroud did in his rookie year. You got Nico Collins. You got Tank Dell. You got Dalton Schultz. You add Joe Mixon. Studs all over the offense. Defense with a defensive head coach. You add Danielle Hunter. You got Will Anderson Jr., another year of experience. So, there was reason to look at the roster and look at what they did last year and say, they should take a step up. They could be a contender. They might be a top contender this year. But sitting at 7-5, again, you're probably going to make the playoffs because, they play in a not great division. The Colts are sitting right there, but the Colts, I don't, you only put up 6 points against the Lions. We'll get to that next. But I don't think you watch a Colts game and Anthony Richardson can do some electrifying things, but I think you watch a Colts game, I don't think you have any real confidence that they're going to make a run here to pass the Texans, and the Texans do still have some winnable games, but you drop a very winnable game against a bad Tennessee Titans team coming in at 2-8, and you're at home. It's just this whole season, I feel like even when the Texans, they were 5-1, maybe 6-2, something like that, and they might have been 6-1, but even then it was stuff's a little bit off. Diggs is out for the season. You do have Nico Collins back. He had 5 catches, 92 yards and a touchdown. Tank Dell, three grabs for 72 yards. Spread the ball around. Cade Stover had a few catches and a touchdown. Joe Mixon had 5 catches. Dalton Schultz had a couple. You got a couple other guys here with 1 catch. But CJ Stroud just doesn't look as comfortable. And we saw what he's capable of. So I lean more toward, the sophomore slump. I feel like that hasn't been as much of a thing in recent memory, whereas it used to be every year, anytime you had a rookie quarterback that did some big things, they would always kind of dip in their second year. But So I would lean toward it being that, and that he's going to bounce back, and they'll have Diggs healthy next year, and you're still going to have all the weapons, and there's lessons to be learned here, and like it's just not clicking properly. But you're still 7-5. You're still probably going to make the playoffs. But for most of the season and coming into the season, I think if you're a Texans fan, you're like, yeah, we should win the division, and we should be poised to make some noise in the playoffs. They won a playoff game last year, and I don't know. Right now, it's like I said, cautious pessimism. I wouldn't get carried away with the pessimism. Like you're still probably going to make the playoffs. You should make the playoffs. You got talent. You got talent on the defense. You give up 32 points to the Titans. That's not good. But like the talent's there. The defensive play caller is there. You feel like you got a good coach. You got a good quarterback. You got good weapons. But it's just not clicking for whatever reason. And the Titans, I guess they can still go 9-8 and salvage a couple of my futures bets. I'm not counting on it, but I don't know. We did get a Will Levis meme of the day where just he throws a pick, ends up throwing a pick six, head down, just running full speed with his head down. So at least the Titans are back to giving us the Will Levis meme of the week. So shouts out to them. But shouts out the War Daddies up front, man. Tavondre Sweat, Jeffrey Simmons, yet again. I feel like they fly under the radar because the Titans are terrible, and like defensive tackle is not the sexiest position in the sport. I love it, but you got a couple planet-sized mutants on the interior, and they're doing their thing week after week against good teams. Texans were 7-4 coming into this game. Vikings were 7-2 coming into that game last week, and those guys made their presence felt. So at the very least, if you're a Titans fan, you feel like, all right, we got some pieces. It's like how I talked about the Giants, like bad team, not winning hardly any games, but you can look at their defensive front and say, like, okay, like we have the makings of a dominant unit in here. Like we can go into a game against mid or bad teams and feel like we have the best unit in the game in our defensive front. And the Titans with the War Daddies, with Landry, and who's on the other side? Literally just played them last week, and I can't remember. But they got solid edge rushers, just absolute studs on the interior. It's something to grow. I from years of playing Madden franchise mode, but also just watching the game for 20 plus years, and I always liked, like, I play Madden to play as a GM. Like I don't care too much about playing the actual games. I just like building teams. I'm a big build from the interior out guy. You're getting a lot of good quality years out of those interior. You look at Jason Kelsey retired. He played a long ass time on the interior. So they're not the highest paid positions. And so if you get those pieces in place first and you got to pay them before you start paying all the other pieces, they're cheaper pieces to pay the big bucks to for their position while you're still filling out the rest of the roster. And once they're in their more expensive years and you start giving extensions to other pieces, then it makes the cap more manageable. And like you got to win in the trenches. You got to win at the line of scrimmage. The Vikings, we'll get to them, but they broke an insane streak in terms of running backs not rushing for touchdowns in the second half. And like Aaron Jones had a fumble on the 2-yard line on the first drive of the game. They've had a couple of those this year. They can't punch it inside the 5 because they don't have the meat up front. They got solid players, but they don't have the size. They don't have the meat. So you got to be able to get a push on the interior, offense or defense. Like the ball is snapped from the interior. That's the first place that there's action happening on any given play. So if you're a Titans fan, at the very least you got to feel good about that defensive front. The Texans, it's a tough loss, man. It's a tough loss. You're probably staring down that 4 seed, which means you're going to get a home playoff game, but there's some good AFC wildcard contenders here, man. The Chargers, the Ravens. If the Ravens jump the Steelers and the Steelers, like any of those 3, you're going to play one of those 3 teams in the first playoff game. And yeah, it's going to be at home. But if you can't even beat the Titans at home, now granted, it's a divisional game, got to throw the records out the window. But it's going to be a whole lot tougher to beat a Jim Harbaugh coached Chargers team, to beat a Mike T coached Steelers team, to beat a John Harbaugh coached Ravens team with Lamar, two-time MVP, two-time MVP Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, who was the offensive player of the year front runner up until Saquon Barkley these last 2 weeks decided he's going to go full Adrian Peterson and is now he's on pace to set the single season rushing record, which shouts out to Adam. He was the first one to point it out. I may be the first one to point it out, like actually talking on a show or on a podcast about it. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but that's got to be recognized what he's doing. But even still, like Derrick Henry, monster, having a monster season. So if you're the Texans, like you go from, hey, we got a shot to go on a run, get to the conference title game, maybe get to the Super Bowl, maybe win a Super Bowl, to now like you're probably not going to be favored in the first round. So tough for the Texans. But again, their only competition in the division right now is the Colts, who are now 5-7, lost 24-6 to the Lions. Now you got to say, to whatever extent, did a pretty nice job on the Lions' offense, Colts' defense, holding them to only 24 points. Which, I mean, 24 points a lot of the times is going to win you a game, but for the Lions, it's like the Lions on these mid and bad teams. Like they played, the Bucs beat them, Vikings played them very tight, and they only snuck out with a win by 2 points. And I think the Rams lost only by 6 points. But beyond that, Detroit's just beating the dog shit out of people. Like I think they beat Green Bay by 10 points. But if you watch that game, like the rain and everything, and Jordan Love was dealing with injuries, so there's excuses, valid excuses on the Packers side. But if that game, like when those two teams play again in Detroit at Ford Field in a dome, Jordan Love, hopefully he's healthier for that game, and we get we get the best version of those two teams going at it. But like, I mean, with absolutely no disrespect to Green Bay, like it would not shock me if Detroit beats the dog shit out of Green Bay. Like, just like it's not going to shock me if Detroit beats the dog shit out of Minnesota in Week 18 in Detroit, because they're just that damn good. Like they're putting themselves in that category with the 07 Pats, the 99 Rams, the 98 Vikings, where it's just like they are going to beat the piss out of you. And it is important to note the Rams did win that Super Bowl, but the Vikings lost. Pats, undefeated Pats, lost. So it's not a guarantee that you're going to win it all, but that's the type of team they are. They're just beating the shit out of people. But they only put up 24 points this week, but then the defense, you hold the Colts to 6 points. Obviously Anthony Richardson is not yet in a category of being a good quarterback. He goes 11 for 28, just another abysmal game. I have not watched many Colts games. The only Colts game I've watched anywhere near its entirety was the Vikings game, in which Anthony Richardson did not play. But I feel like there's no reason that this dude should be 11 for 28 in a game. Like, is it? And I guess Colts fans, let me know. Are we just not designing a quick game, or is he that bad that he can't execute a quick game? Like, if you got a guy who's going 11 for 28, like, can we get him some, like, just some quick, like, throw some running back screens? Even, a timing route on a slant might be an issue with the timing for him. I don't know, but like, there has to be more we can do from an offensive scheme standpoint to have this dude at least at 50% completion percentage. Like 11 for 28 is god awful. Granted, he didn't throw any interceptions. He did fumble, but he didn't lose it. But man, it's rough. You only run the ball 21 times to the 28 pass attempts, and 10 of those runs were Richardson. I don't know how many were designed versus scrambles, but 11 carries for Jonathan Taylor. I don't know if he got hurt or if this is just a case of like we're getting the shit kicked out of us, because you start the game with a field goal. So you're up 3-0 and you lose 24-6. But like, just Like there's 60 minutes in a football game. Let's run the ball. Let's run the ball. I don't understand. Like you have an 8-play drive here in the first quarter that you end up punting, and they run the ball 3 times. There's a 10-play drive, a field goal drive here. Ran the run, pass, run for no gain, pass incomplete. A 7-play drive here in the second quarter. Starts with a 10-yard. A lot of penalties here, putting them behind the sticks. So it seems like they might have some shit they got to clean up. But you got to pass, run for no gain, pass incomplete. Like you gotta run the ball. I don't care if you're losing. I don't care. Look, they're down 14-6 at the half. You're still in position to run the ball. You're only down by 1 score. Even after the third quarter, it's 21-6. It's a 2-score game. You got 15 minutes left. You can still run the ball. Run the ball. I don't understand. Now, he wasn't effective. 11 carries for 35 yards, 3.18 average. But again, like the more you run the ball, the more effective you get later in the game because you're grinding the defense down, you're controlling the ball more, you're keeping your offense on the field more, their defense on the field more. So as the game goes on, they wear down, they get tired, and that's when you start. Like we talked about Saquon going full Adrian Peterson. Like that was the Adrian Peterson mold. You look at the game where he set the single game rushing record, 298, but what did he do? The first half, he only had like 50-some yards, but you keep grinding at it. You just keep punching them in the mouth, and then you break some late. You cannot get away from the run, and rarely are you going to win games if you're not running the ball with any level of consistency. And that's not even to say like the results are consistent, just that you're running the ball to keep them honest, especially if your quarterback is 11 for 28. What are we doing? I don't get it, man. But Lions, kind of a whatever day at the offense, or whatever day at the office for the offense. Goff, 26 for 36, 269, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Did have a fumble, but it was not lost. Jahmyr Gibbs, 21 carries for 90 yards and a couple touchdowns. David Montgomery, only 8 carries, 37 yards. Craig Reynolds had a rushing attempt. Jameson Williams and Jared Goff had a couple. But your top 2 running backs, 29 carries to 36 pass attempts for Goff. And so you get a little more passing here than running. But like Goff is having a monster season. Goff is, top 3 probably in the MVP race right now. And so like you can lean a little bit more into that. And then the scheme is working so well, and Goff is playing with such great rhythm that you could skew it a little more toward the pass and get away with it if you got an offense that's running like they're running. If you got a guy in Goff or a guy like Goff who's doing what he's doing this year. But just a good solid win for the Lions. I feel like any other team in the league would be like, yeah, we beat a team 24-6. Hell yeah. It's a great win. For the Lions, it's like ho hum. It's like we could have done better. We should have hung 40 on these guys. But that's the expectations they've built for themselves. But Colts still in the wild card race, still in the AFC South race. But I just on a week to week basis, like I just don't think you see enough from them to feel like they're going to overcome the deficit that they have in the wild card, or the deficit they have even with the Texans slipping up a bit here over the last couple months, really. But I wouldn't have any confidence in them. And even if they did, like if they won the division over the Texans, it's more about the Texans falling apart than the Colts probably figuring it all out and going on this monster run. And same for the wild card race. But like the Broncos suddenly fall apart, because I don't think you're catching the Chargers, Steelers, or Ravens above that, whichever one of those North teams ends up not winning the division. But if the Colts somehow snuck into the playoffs, like they're not going to win a playoff game. That just is what it is. Dolphins, meanwhile, clawing back 5-6. They win 34-15 over the now 3-9 Patriots. The Patriots were not frisky in Miami. And Miami has been a house of horrors for the Patriots for a long time, even with the great Bill Belichick and the great Tom Brady. They often would lose games down in Miami. And Miami, they just take care of business here, man. It's this is what you would expect. Miami, they're stringing them together now. This is what I think 3 wins in a row for Miami. They're clawing their way back into it. They're a game and a half, I think, behind the Broncos. The Broncos, I believe, are 7-5. So you're 1 game back in the loss column. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago. The Dolphins are putting themselves in a position to possibly steal that last wild card. I wouldn't be super confident just because the Broncos do have that lead. And the Broncos are playing really good football right now. There's nothing really. Their defense is damn good and has there is some future championship caliber defense potential with that defense, but you look around. There's nothing super sexy about it. Like the receivers are playing pretty well, but there's no like top tier stud. You gotta like Cortland Sutton, but he's a very under the radar kind of like just a workman #1 receiver. He's going to put up his numbers, but it's not flashy. It's not sexy. He's never going to be in that conversation for top 5 receivers in the league. Probably not going to be in that conversation for top 10 wide receivers in the league. Bo Nix, he doesn't have the rocket arm. He can run with the ball, but he's not Lamar. He's not Josh Allen. He's not doing crazy things running the ball. So it's just good, solid, fundamental football, which you would expect. I hate Sean Payton, but this is what you would expect from a Sean Payton coach team. Just good, solid, fundamental ball. I don't see them slipping and sliding down the stretch as much. I mean, let's pull up the Broncos schedule and take a look. Because the Dolphins certainly, I think, can get to 9 wins. But is that going to be enough? Because if you're the Broncos, you only need 3 more wins really to pull it off. And they got, that is their old schedule. Let's see. They got the Browns in Denver next week. Browns coming off a win, and we know the Jameis roller coaster, so this might be they hit a peak, and now they're coming back down, and then maybe they'll win the week after that. But they got the Browns at home, the Colts at home. You got at the Chargers, at the Bengals, and you know how I feel about the Bengals on this show. But obviously they have a ton of talent at receiver, and they have Joe Burrow. But the Broncos defense, that's going to be an interesting matchup. And then you end with the Chiefs, which, there's some bad blood there. You almost get the win in Kansas City. The Chiefs might have it sewed up here, or they might still be fighting in terms of, because, if the Bills keep pace and they lose in week 18 and the Bills win, then the Bills get the #1 seed. So there could be a lot to play for in that Chiefs-Broncos game. But I think the Broncos, they should win these next 2 games. That's going to put them at 9-5. And then I think you get one of these 2 Chargers Bengals. I think they're a better team than the Bengals. They're a more complete team than the Bengals. They don't have the sexiness of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but they're a better team. They're a better team overall. They're balanced around just across the board. They can do everything pretty good at the very least. So they should win that game. Chargers, we'll see that. That's going to be a big game. That's going to be a chance maybe to jump the Chargers in the standings, because the Chargers got the Ravens tonight as of recording, so that could be a loss for the Chargers. I'm on the Ravens this week, but that could be a case where the Broncos can go into LA, and we know no LA team has a home field advantage, so I would imagine it's not that long of a trip from Denver out to LA. So I've made that connecting flight from LA to Denver to wherever the fuck else. It ain't that far. So probably going to be a lot of Broncos fans in the stands for that LA game. And if you rip that off and you're at 10-5, they might have jumped the Chargers by that point. So I like the Broncos through that. Now, granted, we are not talking about the Broncos. We're supposed to be talking about the Dolphins. But the Dolphins, they're doing everything they can. They put themselves in a hole early in the season. Tua goes down, they get Tua back, they lose a couple straight, and that is probably going to be the key there for them, is that they lost those couple games when Tua got back. If they got one of those two and they were at 6-5 now you feel a little more comfortable, but they got to go to Lambeau next week. Then they get the Dolphins and they go at Houston. Then they host the 49ers and at the Browns and then at the Jets. So you got 2 Jets games left. You can pick up both of those the way the Jets are playing right now. You win that Browns game. That's 3. And then Texans, Niners, on paper before the season, you like the Texans and the Niners in those games. I think you can get one of those 2. So if you get both Jets games, you get one of those 2, and you get the Browns game. That's 4 wins. I don't think they're going to win in Lambeau. I will save that discourse for the pick show. But spoiler alert, probably picking Green Bay. But you got a shot to win 4 games here and get to 9-8. I don't know who would have the tiebreaker between the Dolphins and the Broncos. That's worth doing a deep dive into. But I don't want to waste a ton of airtime looking all that up. But either way, you're the Dolphins. You get a big, blowout win, multi-score win over the Patriots. You handle business at home against an inferior opponent. You keep clawing your way back to 500. Now, if they can go into Green Bay next week and steal one from the Packers, the way that they're playing right now, like the Dolphins, the way they're playing, I think they're playing better than a 5-6 team. But Green Bay is hot right now. They're handling their business. They beat the shit out of the Niners, and granted, did not have Brock Purdy, had Brandon Allen in there. But that's going to be an interesting game. I believe that's a Sunday night football game. So that's going to be huge for them. If they can get back to 500 and beat a team like Green Bay in Lambeau, then I think they're going to start ripping these off. You can beat the Jets at home. You can beat the Texans on the road. You can beat the Niners at home. You can beat the Browns on the road. And you get if they beat the Packers, that could give them the juice and the confidence to rip off the rest of these. In which case, they could get to 11-6. And if the Broncos are sitting there at 10-7, bump them out. But I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. But the Dolphins, they still got a realistic shot here for sure to get in there. The odds aren't great, but it's not impossible. So we'll see. But good on them getting it done, stringing them together, 3 straight wins. You're at 2-6. You feel like you're buried, but they're clawing themselves back into it. And this is kind of like coming into the season. I was not high on the Dolphins. I did not have my expectations for the Dolphins were 8-win team, maybe 9 at the most. I think I have a futures bet for them under 9.5 wins. Although I did go on the record and say they were going to be under 500 and they weren't going to make the playoffs. And that could still happen, but they're looking like they're a team they're going to get to 9 wins. They look like they can get to 9 wins. So even if you miss out on the playoffs, if you start 2-6 and you finish 9-8, or God forbid 10-7, I think you build some momentum going into next year. There's a resilience there, whereas last year, they were the front runners. They were the best team in football into November, or at least had the best record in football into November, and then they fell apart when we get to the cold months late in November, December, January. This can kind of be the opposite. You start real bad, pick up momentum, in the way that loss of momentum kind of carried into this year. The gaining of momentum towards the end of the season, even if you miss the playoffs, I think can carry into next year. And we should see a Dolphins bounce back. It depends on what they do in the draft, free agency, and so on and so forth. But they're not out of it. And speaking of not out of it, speaking of Florida teams that are not out of it, my Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Shouts out Colton. Shouts out Bucky Irving. These boys, like I said, they had a stretch here of winnable games coming up where they can get themselves back in the division. Right now, they're only a game back. They're at 5-6. They beat the shit out of the Giants, led by Tommy DeVito. You love to see it. But 30-7, Baker Mayfield I've been proclaiming this for well over a month. This dude's playing his ass off. He's keeping the fire burning in that Buccaneers team. They get Mike Evans back this week. Mike Evans has 5 catches, 68 yards. Not top tier Mike Evans game, but he's working back from the injury. But Bucky Irving, 12 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown, a 7.25 average, adds 6 grabs for 64 yards. So Bucky Irving, do not sleep on Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving is a dog. Bucky Irving is a beast, and he's handling business. Rachaad White adds 12 carries, 37 yards and a touchdown. Baker Mayfield, 4 scrambles for 29 yards and a touchdown. Sean Tucker, 4 carries, only 3 yards and a touchdown. So four touchdowns on the ground, a team here committed to the run. Your 2 backs split even, 12 carries apiece, that's 24. You add another 8, that's 32 runs in total. And if you want to take the scrambles off, that puts you at 28 and 30 pass attempts. Baker is another one of these quarterbacks playing at a level where if you skew a little more toward the pass, you can justify it because of how damn good he's been. But 24 for 30, 294 yards, no interceptions. He did have 2 fumbles, lost one of them. So you'd like to see him clean that up. In fact, the Bucs fumbled the ball 4 times. They only lost 1. So some room for improvement there. But defensively, they get 3 interceptions off of Tommy DeVito. Do they? This says they don't. But then here defensively, 3 pass deflections, my mistake. So Tommy DeVito, I guess, played a clean game, 21 for 31, 189 yards. I think for Giants fans, this is probably what you want. You're sick of weekly having to fucking bitch and moan about Daniel Jones, so you get him the fuck out of there. He's not even on the team anymore, cleared waivers. Hearing rumors it's Minnesota or Baltimore. As a Vikings fan, I would love to bring in Daniel Jones. I talked last week about how it's a good move for both parties. You just remove the distraction of him being now the 4th string quarterback in the Giants behind fucking Tim Boyle. Just get him out of the locker room, get him off the team. There's no distraction there. You don't have to answer questions week after week about it. And then for Dan Jones, he can hop onto another team, finish the year, kind of learn the system, decide like maybe this is a good spot. Like I think him going to Minnesota makes a ton of sense. As a Vikings fan, he adds a little more than Nick Mullins does. I think Nick Mullins honestly might be a little more turnover prone than Daniel Jones. I think Nick Mullins plays with a lot more confidence than Daniel Jones, which is valuable to some extent and can be detrimental because Nick Mullins has the arm strength of Chad Pennington, but he thinks he's Brett Favre, which is not a great mix. Sometimes good things happen. Other times catastrophic things happen. And I mean, this is a dude, he will go out there and sling it and throw for 400 yards and 5 interceptions if he has to. Daniel Jones, he adds the running element in, which I think, looking into the future, matches him well with J.J. McCarthy and his scrambling ability. So you got 2 guys that have similar skill sets, a little bit less turnover prone than Mullins. Not to say that he's not turnover prone. But you look at what Kevin O'Connell's done, how he's rehabilitated Sam Darnold and turned him into, I don't know how it's going to shake out because there's a ton of good quarterback play around the league, but a Pro Bowl caliber guy this year. He had a couple game stretch here recently with the Colts and the Jaguars game where he was turning the ball over a ton, specifically in the red zone, but then he bounces back, has a really nice clean game against the Titans, has a fantastic game yesterday. What he did there, we know what he did with the Pastronaut, with Josh Dobbs last year, coming in with like 3 days to prep to be the backup. Jaron Hall gets a concussion, forces Josh Dobbs in the game, and Kevin O'Connell is telling him like, okay, look over here. That's Justin Jefferson. He's running this route. Look over there. That's Jordan Addison. He's going to run this route. Your tight end. This is the concept. Here's how I want you to like installing the playbook live in his ear while he's, it's supposed to be just here's the play and then the quarterback spits it out to the offense. But with Dobbs, it was like here's the play and then here's what's happening in the play. Spit out the play so everyone else knows what's happening. But then I got to describe to you what's going to happen and how I want you to go through your progressions. And They won their first 2 games with Dobbs, with Kevin O'Connell doing that. We know how he quieted Kirk's mind, and then Kirk all of a sudden in his first year with Kevin O'Connell, sets a record for fourth quarter comebacks, has 11 one-score wins, all these like game-winning drives and fourth quarter comebacks, and that Kirk had of being able to quiet his mind. So Kevin O'Connell has built himself a resume. Even if you go back to him, offensive coordinator for the Rams in the year they won the Super Bowl, like Matt Stafford was a very talented quarterback the entire time he was with the Lions, and obviously they had organizational issues that were beyond his control that prevented them from ever being, a real contender. But Matt Stafford, you look historically before he went to the Rams, not a lot, like quite few wins on the road against teams above 500. Like he was not as good. He was a kind of an overrated quarterback through his Lions run, and then he goes to the Rams, and Kevin O'Connell was kind of that guy who was at his hip. McVay obviously has a great relationship with Stafford, but he's got to coach the whole team. Kevin O'Connell was that guy with him in his ear for the best season of Matt Stafford's career. So I think Kevin O'Connell has built himself up a nice resume of coaxing the most out of these quarterbacks. So I think it's a logical spot for Daniel Jones to say, like, okay, I can go there. I can get used to the playbook this year. I can learn everything coming next offseason. If J.J. McCarthy with the meniscus isn't ready to go off rip, maybe I can get some QB1 snaps here, at least in the spring. And then because Kevin O'Connell has built this resume, even if Daniel Jones doesn't play at all next year, if he comes to Minnesota, chooses to re-sign because he likes the vibe, they were number 1 and number 2 in the first 2 years of the free agent report cards. So like it's a good vibe, it's a good building, great culture, great team, great teammates. If he likes it, decides to stick around for one more year, be the backup next year, even if he doesn't play, I think Kevin O'Connell has built up enough clout around the league where someone might take a chance on Daniel Jones the year after that and say, like, we didn't get the quarterback in the draft maybe that we wanted to, or we're going into the draft, not next year's draft, but the draft after that, 2026. And we're going to look for a guy, but we want to get a bridge guy in there. Like, he might be able to sit the entire year next year and just by nature of learning from Kevin O'Connell and the clout he's built up as a QB whisperer, he might be able to get himself a bridge job without doing anything next year other than just existing on a Kevin O'Connell roster. So I think that would make some sense for him. But we're supposed to be talking about the Giants and the Bucs. The Giants, they're dead, but I think you get more juice out of having Tommy DeVito in the game than another Daniel Jones game, but they also get blown out, which is what the Giants fans want because they want that top pick. Some people, I'm sure, want Shedeur Sanders. Some want Cam Ward. I know Coe out there wants Travis Hunter, and then maybe to trade up. If you got the top pick of the second round, trade up back into the first round if one of these QBs falls down a bit because it's not as dynamic a quarterback class as last year. So we could see quarterbacks maybe more in the middle and late part of that first round, if not falling to the second round. So I think it's good for the Giants. It's good for New Jersey to have a Paisano out there firing them up, get some chicken cutlets on the grill in the pregame tailgate, and then still get the doors blown off you and get what you want, which is another loss. Just keep the tank rolling. But the Bucs, huge win. Decisive win, beat the shit out of him, even with the 4 fumbles and only losing 1. Still, decisive win, beat the shit out of him. Like I said, you're getting closer. Now you gotta jump the Falcons because you lost twice to them, so you can't tie them. You can't have the same record and jump them. But they're also alive in the wild card race because the Rams lose, they're 5-6. Niners lose, they're 5-6. Commanders lose, they've now lost 3 straight. They're 7-5 on the way down. So like, Bucs aren't even out of the wild card race. I've been talking about the Bucs as I think they're a 10-win team. I think they're going to get to 10-7, and if everything is chalk, Falcons will be 9-8. And they'll win the division. But even if it's not chalk and the Falcons, let's say they both go 10-7, Bucs might still sneak in. They might still sneak in that wild card. And I mean, Bucs Eagles in the first round, that could be a juicy matchup. I would still probably pick the Eagles the way they're playing right now. We'll get to them in part 2 tomorrow, but I don't know, man. Bucs are doing their thing. Do not sleep on the Bucs. Do not sleep on the Bucs. And God forbid they win the division and they get a home playoff game. Probably gonna have to play Minnesota or Green Bay, who I think both those teams are better than them. But the Bucs can beat either one of those teams for sure. I don't want to see the Bucs. As a Vikings fan, I don't want anything to do with the Bucs. I'll play the Rams again. I'll play the Niners again. I'll play the Falcons, what would be again, because we play them coming up. Same thing with the Cardinals, who we got next week. I'd rather play any of those 4 teams right now than play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay in the first round of the playoffs. So, shouts out the Bucs. Shouts out Bucky Irving. Shouts out my boy Colton. This one's for you, baby. Bucs back in that hunt, back in the hunt. And team that's, I guess, you know what? I'm not going to do that. Let me not get crazy here. But I did tell you that the Dallas Cowboys were going to win this game. I guaranteed it. I went on the pick show. Caesar said I was crazy. He said Dallas has no shot. What are you even talking about? That their stadium's falling apart. They got blinding lights coming through. They're getting blown out by 20 plus points in every home game. I said, Caesar, look at the schedule. They ain't at home. They're in Washington. They're going to win this game. Washington is starting to slide a little bit, starting to fall apart a little bit. Let's see if they can bounce back. Here coming up, the rest of their schedule. But the Dallas Cowboys, they did it. They did it for me. I guaranteed that win, and they pulled it off in one of the wackiest, craziest, most ridiculous fourth quarters. And honestly, it was like the last 4 minutes of the game was nuts. Absolutely insane, dude. In fact, I want to look at the timing here. Just the fourth quarter alone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 possessions total in the fourth quarter in this game. And it starts out with punt. Dallas gets a field goal. Washington fumbles. Dallas gets a touchdown. Washington gets a touchdown. Dallas gets a touchdown. Washington gets a field goal. Dallas punts. Washington gets a touchdown. Dallas gets a touchdown. Just absolutely insane, man. The whole, if you're listening to this, you've probably seen the memes online. You've probably seen the highlights. But just an absolutely absurd ending to a game where I don't know what the score was, but I looked at it and Dallas was up. I'm like, Dallas got this game in hand. And then there was another 3 scores after that, or 4 scores after that. Just absolutely insane. Just the fact that Washington scores with 21 seconds left. And with 21 seconds left, and they miss the extra point that would have tied the game. And then with 21 seconds left, there's another touchdown and an interception. Just wacky, absolutely absurd. I'll take it as the man, who had the bravery, the gusto to come on a show and guarantee a Dallas Cowboys victory in 2024. So I'm going to take my victory lap. This is me right now taking a victory lap. Shouts out to the Cowboys. They got it done. Cowboys, if the Bengals are out of it, I ain't going to sit here and say, oh, the Cowboys, they might still be in the mix. They might still be in the mix. They're not in the mix. They're only 2 games back in the loss column, though, right now, of the Commanders. But the Commanders, man, it's been a rough stretch here. Jaden Daniels has not quite been himself. A little more volume stats today. When they were winning a lot of games, he was not putting up these crazy stats. They were just very efficient, and they moved the ball, and they accumulated yards. Here, 25 for 38, 275, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Those interceptions, and granted, one was at the end of the game, just flinging it up there for a Hail Mary. But, Terry McLaurin had the crazy play. I think it was an 87-yard touchdown. Maybe that's a lie. It was not 87 yards. Maybe it was. I don't know. 86 yards, excuse me. I was close. I'm looking at him like, is this it? And it's like, no, like there's 15 more fucking drives after whatever I'm looking at right now. But if you're Washington, I think there's got to be some cause for concern here. Defensively, I feel like they played a pretty solid game up until the just insane last 4 or 5 minutes of that game. But you lose 3 in a row. You got the Titans at home coming up, and you got the Saints in New Orleans, which should be winnable games. Well, we just watched the Titans go into Houston and pull off a win. Are they getting that 2 weeks in a row? Probably not. But you finish up Eagles, Falcons at home, and then at the Cowboys, which at Dallas, terrible. So should still win 10 games. Should still win 10 games, and then it might come down to the tiebreaker with Tampa Bay, which Tampa Bay won. So if things come to fruition the way I see them, with Tampa Bay winning 10 games, that could bump the Commanders out. Because if the Falcons beat the Commanders in this situation, let's say the Commanders beat the Titans, beat the Saints, beat the Cowboys, lose to the Eagles, lose to the Falcons. I think the Falcons then would win 10 games. So they'd win the division. And then the Bucs would be 10-7 in the wild card race. Commanders 10-7. Lost to the Bucs straight up. Commanders are out. So the Commanders are riding a dangerous line here. That Falcons game is going to be huge because if you beat the Falcons, number one, it puts you in a better position to win 11 games, which is probably going to put you in the playoffs. But it also puts you in a position where, if everything's not chalk and then the Falcons and the Falcons end up winning less games than the Bucs, then you got the tiebreaker on them if it comes down. And let's say the Bucs run the table, they win 11 games, and the Falcons win 10 games. And now they're in the wild card race. You need that head-to-head tiebreaker. If you don't have the head-to-head tiebreaker against Atlanta or the Bucs, and you're at 10 wins, you're playing a very dangerous game. Now, they do have the benefit of they blew out the Cardinals, so you got your heads up on the Cardinals if one of these other teams, because right now Seattle's leading that division. So if it comes down to wild card tiebreaker against the Cardinals, you got that on the Cardinals, and they did not play San Francisco. They did not play the Rams, and they do not play Seattle. So that's going to get down more into the weeds. But if you're the Commanders, you're 7-5, and I think you're safe at 11-6. But that's going to be tough to do. It's not impossible. The only game that you look at and say, they're probably going to lose is the Eagles game. And again, it's a divisional game. You got to throw the records out the window. Washington has played the Eagles tough the last few years, but that's the toughest game for sure. All the other games are winnable games. So you can get to 11-6 for sure. But the way they're playing right now, 3-game losing streak, would it shock you if the Titans went on the road and beat the Commanders next week? I don't know if it would shock you. I don't think you would pick it. I don't think you would bet on it. But it wouldn't shock you. The Saints have, they're on a 2-game win streak. I believe they're on a bye this week. So see what they do next week. But then you got to play at New Orleans. The Saints are not as bad as they had been a few weeks ago. And at some point, Dallas has to win a home game, right? At some point, maybe not. But Washington, they're flirting with it, man. They are flirting with it. But that's part one. We'll be back tomorrow, part two. I was going to do the Vikings game in here, and I touched on them in just about every game because I love my Vikings and love to talk about them. But we'll see. I may end up doing a fully separate episode because tomorrow we got to cover the 4 o'clock games, Denver and Las Vegas, San Francisco and Green Bay, Arizona and Seattle, and then the 2 primetime games, Eagles and Rams, and then tonight's Monday Night Football game, Ravens at Chargers. So 5 games there. Some of these we can probably get through pretty quick. San Francisco and Green Bay. I might take a look at some wild card stuff there. So we'll probably squeeze the Vikings into part 2 tomorrow. But this is a recap. The early games, the 1 o'clock games from Sunday from, what is this, week 12, I believe? Yes. So appreciate you tuning in. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, follow on Instagram at Football Heads Show. There's 2 S's in there, Football Heads Show. And until next time, take it easy, football heads.
Move it, football head!